Shabbat Shalom. This evening's sermon towards the end is going to mention sexual violence. I know that not everybody is prepared to hear about that, so it's not going to be very explicit, but take care of yourself. Rabbi Mary Zamor, the executive director of the Women's Rabbinic Network, is perhaps the leading expert on gender pay inequality in Jewish organizations. She's an expert advocate for parental and family leave and a sought-after speaker about clergy sexual misconduct. Moreover, she's edited 2 anthologies, The Sacred Table, about diverse Jewish approaches to ethical eating, and The Sacred Exchange, Creating a Jewish Money Ethic. Rabbi Zamor was surprised then to receive an invitation to speak on a panel about Israel. Now, sure, Rabbi Zamor is a passionate progressive Zionist. She's a rabbi who cares deeply about Israel, but Israel is not among her many and varied areas of expertise. Still, Rabbi Zamor knew why she was invited. The Israel Advocacy Organization that invited her has been criticized for having numerous panels of expert speakers, all of them male. We call those manels. They had hoped to balance that with one panel made up entirely of women. Rabbi Zamor suggested a different approach, in integrating women into panels about Israel more generally, not only on all female or mostly female panels about Israeli women's issues. Rabbi Zamor's expertise includes knowing a great deal about how women's voices have been silenced or disregarded, and she possesses expansive rosters of women with authoritative knowledge on countless Jewish topics. A plethora of women are experts on Zionism and Israel, so Rabbi Zamor was able to suggest more than a few to the organization whose invitation she felt compelled to decline. Rabbi Zamor writes, spoiler alert, claiming that there are no female or non-binary experts available is never true, and therefore not a valid excuse for convening a manel. In last week's portion, women were seen and heard in ways that are unusual for the Torah. 5 daughters of a man named Tzalafachad approached Moses after their father's death. Their father has left no son, and no provision existed for women to inherit. The daughters are named, which is unusual for Torah. Mochla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah asked that their father's property become theirs. Moses is uncharacteristically flummoxed. He goes directly to God, asking what to do. God answers, the plea of Tzalafachad's daughters is just. When a man dies leaving no sons, the daughters inherit. A small step forward in the history of women's rights. This week, though, an objection is raised by the daughters' relatives, that is, the men who would have inherited if the daughters could not. Their complaint, if the daughters marry men of different tribes, the inheritance will ultimately be lost to this clan. This time, the daughters' voices are not heard. And this time, Moses does not take the query to God. Having apparently silenced the very women whose outcry God had ruled just, Moses restricts their rights, ruling that daughters who inherit may marry anyone they like, provided that the person they want to marry is inside their tribe. Women are harmed when their voices are not heard. If female experts aren't considered for panels, then all women's professional opportunities are attenuated. Tzalafachad's daughters' rights to marry are limited. Additional examples abound. Americans for too long did not heed women who credibly claimed sexual misconduct at the hands of men in power. Progressives looked the other way to protect a president we otherwise admired, delaying a national reckoning for more than 2 decades. Imagine how many victims could have been spared between the late 1990s and 2017 if only we had not tolerated President Clinton's sexual misconduct. but had put all powerful men on notice. Only a few years earlier, conservatives had done the same in support of a Supreme Court nominee whose ideology they shared. Justice Thomas's misogyny and manufactured victimhood have harmed women across 3 decades and counting. Sometimes whole societies are harmed when women's voices are silenced or belittled. Sometimes people die. In January, I told you about a report in the Israeli daily Haaretz that the soldiers who repeatedly warned that something unusual was happening on the Gaza border were women. Those women are spotters. A role that Haaretz explains involves staring at a screen for hours on end, studying surveillance cameras for untoward activities. The Hebrew term for a spotter is tatzpanit, a feminine word indicating that nowadays only women perform this task. After October 7th, the tatzpaniot were enraged. During their years of military service, they say they've grown accustomed to the fact that they don't count. No notice was given to the repeated warnings they raised before Hamas's infiltration on Black Saturday. Warnings that, it seems to them, were going in one IDF earpiece and out the other. These included reports about Hamas's preparations near the border fence, its drone activity in recent months, its efforts to knock out cameras, the extensive use of vans and motorcycles, and even rehearsals for the shelling of tanks. Once again, women were badly harmed when women were ignored. Yes, among the murdered and abducted, and uniquely as women, victimized by sexual assault committed against them by Hamas terrorists. The United Nations was not talking about Israeli victims when it reported, according to the UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict, women can face devastating forms of sexual violence, which are sometimes deployed systematically to achieve military or political objectives. Rape committed during war is often intended to terrorize the population, break up families, and in some instances, change the ethnic makeup of the next generation. Sexual violence is also a method of exhibiting power. The terrorist effectively proclaims, "I can dominate you completely." Sheryl Sandberg's devastatingly effective film, Screams Before Silence, which can be viewed at no charge on YouTube, demonstrates that victims of sexual violence are often murdered after they are violated. Their screams were heard by terrified Israelis nearby, but these women were then silenced forever. That silence was compounded when much of the world denied or downplayed the sexual violence of October 7th. Letty Cotton Pogrebin laments, "Some people are in denial. Rapes didn't happen, they say. Israel faked the numbers. Others accept the facts, but are chillingly dismissive of victims, calling them the unavoidable byproduct of noble rebellion." These apologists sugarcoat Hamas's heinous acts with the honeyed balm of national liberation or the slippery rhetoric of popular resistance. When women cry out but are ignored, the consequences can be horrific. And in this case, turn a conflict upside down. Pogrebin explains, "As a Jew and as a woman, I refuse to let Hamas's brutal assault on Israeli women and girls be forgotten in the fog of war. I feel obligated to describe every violent act committed by Hamas on Jewish female bodies, lest the erasure of the unpleasant details facilitate the terrorist campaign to rebrand themselves as freedom fighters." As our journey through the book of Numbers draws to a close this Shabbat, let us commit ourselves to hearing the voices of women, just as God does, proclaiming, "The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just." We won't always get it right. Even Moses doesn't. And yet, if we will listen, we will hear. We will learn. we will be better prepared to act and build a just future. Amen.